Welcome back to the Brown Word, and we are at the flood. The flood has come when it comes to the life of Noah. And he's been getting ready for this moment. Last week, we talked about the week going up to this moment, but now it has arrived. And there's a couple things here in this section that I really don't think we spend a lot of time thinking about. And so we will get to that in a second. But turn back to Genesis chapter 7. We're just going to look at the rest of the chapter here today. So verses 11 through 24. So, verse 11, it kind of gives us, again, another timestamp, which we have talked about before, but let's look at that again. Verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened. And I love how detailed this is. It's not just, okay, the 600th years of Noah's life. No, it gives you the second month, it gives you the 17th day of that month. So is it February 17th exactly? It's hard to say, depending on the calendar that you think might have been used. However, it is the fact is that it gives you a very specific date, which is very shocking. But then the other thing, too, is how long that construction took, which is, I believe we alluded to that last week with the finishing of the construction of the ark. It took about 100 years because that timestamp from the end of Genesis chapter 5, which gives Noah at about 500 years to now, is 100 years or about 100 years. So it took a long time to get the ark built, but now the flood has come. It has arrived. And not only that, but rain has come too. And we don't really think about this too often. This is one of the few things that I think is in this section. But we don't really think about this too often, that rain really wasn't a big deal, if really a thing, at this time. Rain was not seen as a destructive force, which, well, it's about to. In verse 12, we see that. And rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, and so sorry, going back to verse 12, you have these 40 days and 40 nights of rain coming down. Now, it's interesting where this is put. Is it 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and then they get into the ark, which we're about to see in verses 13 through 16? Or is it just foreshadowing the fact that it rained 40 days and 40 nights? Let's read on to see, because I think that is an interesting question. So let's pick up at verse 13. On the very same day, Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife and the three wives of his sons with them entered the ark. They and every beast according to its kind, and all the livestock according to their kinds, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth according to its kind, and every bird according to its kind, every winged creature. They went to the ark with Noah, two and two of all flesh, in which there was the breath of life. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So I think it's really quite interesting. Um, and you have just this very somber realization that nobody took up this opportunity of survival from Noah. Because my guess is that Noah probably didn't stay silent in between these 100 years, from the point where he gets the news that he is to build this ark to the point that the flood comes. My guess is he probably doesn't stay silent about it. Also, that's a lot of construction, a lot of noise, even without the machinery that we have today. It would be a lot of noise, and it was massive. Remember all that qubit talk that we talked about before? It is a massive undertaking. And so you probably wouldn't be able to just oh, what's that going over there, and just forget about it. No, it would draw a crowd, and it most likely did. Now, we're not told about that in this passage or in scripture about about how many people came and saw the ark and were wondering about it. But my guess is that probably was the case. And so if you're Noah, you go through all these 100 years of building this ark, trying to tell people what's coming, and nobody takes you up on the offer. Yes, your family does, but that's it kind of makes sense why they do, right? Because they live with Noah. But nobody takes him up on his offer. And that's a very sad thing to read. Obviously, the whole flood itself is very sad, but uh, it is incredibly sad to read that nobody takes up this offer of survival. Uh, the other thing that I find interesting too is the end of verse 16. And the Lord shut him in. So it kind of brings my mind those mystery TV shows or mystery movies where you have somebody that is going down a dark corridor with their flashlight. They just walked into a room, and then all of a sudden, it seems for no reason that the door closes behind them. You know what I'm talking about? It kind of gives off that same vibe as we see here, except obviously here it's not the spooky circumstance, but the Lord shuts the door of the ark. Moses and his sons are not the ones to shut it. And I think the reason why Moses, who I believe is the author of the first 5 books of the Bible, I think the reason why he writes this down is to show us the personal involvement of the Lord, not just with the flood, but then with the saving of Noah's family, and thus creation at that the creation at that time, his creation, the fact that he is the one to close the door of the ark shows that he is the one to save them. It's not Noah and his family are the ones, yes, they built the ark, but with the instructions of the Lord, and it's the one, and the Lord is the one to close the door of the ark to finish that vessel of rescue. And I think what a great example of what Jesus has done for you and I. He is that great vessel of rescuing us from our sin, from eternal death, and giving us the opportunity to accept life and rescue through him, him being the, well, quote unquote, the door. And yet, sadly, so many people will reject that gift, just like they rejected Noah's Ark at that time. So, verse 17, the flood continued 40 days on the earth. So, I think this, going back to verse 12, I think this is why, for me personally, I do think that the rain started before Noah and his family and the animals got into the ark and the door closes. Not only in a chronological view of verses 12 through 16, so you have the rain falling, and then you have the animals entering with Noah and his family, and then the door closes in verse 16. But we have this language of continuing in verse 17. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. Now, could that just mean again that verse 12 is foreshadowing verse 17? Yes, I totally think so. But again, the idea of continuing, I think could show that this is something that rain was falling for 40 days and 40 nights, and you would think that people at that time were like, what in the world is going on? Why is there so much water coming from the sky? And maybe we should take this Noah guy seriously now, but they don't. And so the flood gets worse. Look, let's keep reading in verse 17. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. So this it is a global event. The whole entire flood has covered the earth. When it's talking about the cubits there, remember cubit is about 18 inches to 20 inches, depending on the old Hebraic measurement that you would use. So anywhere from 22 and a half to 25 feet of water is being covered, is the high mountains are being covered by that much. So it's an incredible moment, an incredibly destructive moment as well. Verse 21. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that he, being God, that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. So it is an incredibly sad moment. These few verses here, 21 through 23, are incredibly hard to read because you are just thinking of all these people that are dying because of the rejection that they chose to not listen to the Lord through Noah, and they don't seek rescue from him because, well, they didn't seek him, period. And so for you and I, yes, we will not be flooded by a global flood again, which we'll talk about later. But you and I are given an opportunity, the same opportunity, in fact, to be rescued by God. Yes, it may not be from a global flood, but it is from our sin and from eternal death and eternal judgment. And yet, so many will reject that. And so a lot of people look at these verses and think that God is incredibly cruel. And well, if you think that way, if you think of God just being a God of love, then I could see why you would think that. However, for me, as a follower of Jesus who through time and scripture sees that God is a God of justice and a God of grace, he has to step in and do this. The earth was seen with corruption throughout, except for this one individual, and it seems to be his family as well. They're the only ones that are seen as any sort of moral compass. And so he wipes them out and starts again. How could we blame God, knowing that his standard is perfection? But that is why his plan of salvation is as incredible as it is. The fact that he and his only son gave up his life and then to be resurrected 3 days later for you and I think that makes it even more glorious. And so the last piece I want to show is verse 24. And this is something that I think we just breeze over and never really think about. Verse 24, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So this is staggering. So you could take the first 40 days of the flood talked about that is talked about in verse 17. You could talk about those days as separate from these 150 days, and we will get into this how long Noah and the animals and his family, of course, were on the ark. But a lot of the times, we just think about the 40 days of the actual flood. The thing is that they were on there for way longer than that. Just 40 days being with your family and with animals of all types, and the smell too, right? Just would be mind boggling. But the fact that it was 150 or 190 days, and then more, which we will see on Thursday, it was even longer than that, is staggering to think about. So keep that in mind as we go into chapter 8, where the flood will finally start to subside. But keep in mind how long Noah, his family, and the animals were on this ark. It is mind boggling to think about as well. But thanks for spending a little bit of time today with me as we see how God is truly our rescuer. But I will see you on Thursday with the Brahmin word. But thanks for spending time with me today. Thanks.